Hey there! I think we finally got to the point where I can alienate the few Angular fans who might still follow this channel. At last, I'm making a video about Angular and I'm not gonna hold back. I got a chance to work closely with it in past projects, and I have some pretty strong opinions about this entire stack. However, in recent iterations, the team behind the framework pushed forward some fairly impressive changes, and it looks like Angular is finally getting rid of some of its pitfalls. Stick around for the next few minutes and we'll figure out together if Angular still has a fighting chance and if it can be a viable option in the current modern web development space, or if these changes are simply the last breath of an already dying framework. Okay, so first things first, let's give Angular the credit it deserves. I am not intending to bash it for the fun of it, and despite my biases, I'll try to be objective. After all, Angular is still the second most used front-end framework, even though the difference between the first and the second place grows every year. Angular also enjoys a brand name and a popular tech company as a backer. The framework is still under active development, and one of its main selling points is the access to over 4,000 Google projects which rely on various Angular modules. This access is constantly used to test every change in Angular's code, which guarantees a high degree of reliability and stability. Its predecessor, AngularJS, was one of the main players in the transition to SPAs in the early 2010s, and despite the full rewrite between version 1 and 2, Angular managed to rebrand itself and become a serious alternative to React for the past few years. As some of you might know, the transition to version 2 was not as smooth as it could have been, and there was some drama involved, with devs leaving the team because of a divergence of opinions, but more on the negatives in the second part of the video. Getting back to its pros, Angular is probably the first framework to provide a professional, powerful CLI tool. Remember that these are the days when React was not even providing its Create React app solution, and scaffolding projects was a real pain in the ass. So, while the competitors were still figuring out the basics, Angular had an entire stable build, deploy, and maintain process in place. Now, when it comes to real impact, I honestly believe Angular deserves all the credit for the popularity TypeScript enjoys today. It might be hard to believe these days when all tools, libraries, and frameworks come packed with TypeScript by default, but in 2015, choosing TypeScript was far from being a no-brainer. I know, to this day, some people still roll their eyes when considering it, but back then, most of the time, TypeScript was not even in the discussion when starting new projects. So, I'll give Angular the credit for this. They took a chance and made TypeScript the default programming language, and, slowly, the entire dev space followed along. Another big commitment inside Angular was their RxJS usage. Reactive extensions is one of those tools I'm on the fence about. On one hand, I get the benefits and the power it enables on paper. On the other hand, I feel like it has just a few real use cases, and it is often overused in Angular. On top of that, it adds a layer of complexity to the whole development process, a layer which, objectively, is not needed or missed in other libraries. Okay, so as you might see, we are slowly working our way towards the bad parts of Angular. Before doing that, let's not forget to briefly look at two of the major changes in the framework. First of all, we can finally create standalone components, directives, and pipes. If you never worked with Angular before, you might call these regular components or simply components. This is because no other framework felt the need to link components to a random entity called a module for little to no benefit in the long run. So yes, these days you can create Angular components just like you would do in a framework such as React or Vue. Some would call this a big win. I would simply ask, why so late? Signals are the second core update, and they were just released in version 16. These come as a potential replacement to Zone.js, the mechanism handling reactivity in Angular. I can't really be a hater on this one, since React's reactivity model is a mess as well. Only people not familiar with React's rendering and reconciliation models would call that framework reactive. Anyhow, getting back to Angular, it is nice to see they're adapting and learning from other players in the industry. If done right, it might actually replace the current reactivity model in a few years. Okay, now full speed ahead to the bad stuff. So what's my main issue with Angular? Well, simply put, it's over-engineered. Let me explain why by making the same old Angular versus React comparison everybody else did 1,000 times before. At the end of the day, for me, it all boils down to this. If we can build the same type of production-ready, scalable, maintainable apps in Angular and in React, why a basic React app is just a collection of JavaScript functions, hooks and JSX, while an Angular app is a combination of modules, components, pipes, directives, decorators, injected services, imports, and more. My background is in Java, and, as some of you might know, you can't have proper Java code with at least a couple of factories, abstract factories, and, to bring it all together, factories of factories. This is a running joke in the dev community, but I guess Angular never got the message. I'll let you guess in which front-end framework I actually had to implement the factory pattern. Hint: it is the same framework which has in its documentation gems such as defining dependency providers or hierarchical injectors. I might be wrong, but if the problem you are solving is simply rendering buttons on the screen and then listening to events, you should not have a section called hierarchical injectors in your documentation. Yes, I know, Angular does wonders in large front-end teams because it imposes a strict project structure and enforces good programming habits. I've seen this firsthand, and yes, this is true. But I've also seen large React projects working as well, or maybe even better. You don't have to take my word for it. Here is a recent poll I did on the channel, and you'll see that the community's sentiments on Angular are questionable at best. Also, despite being the second most used front-end framework, Angular is doing terribly on both interest and retention. There are various reasons for this poor performance, but here is a good overview one of you guys was nice enough to share in the comments. So here we are. There is a lot of work going into Angular, and we should all respect and appreciate it. However, just like many times before, it feels like Angular is always on the wrong path. Be it the full rewrite that needed to happen to get to version 2, or members of the Angular team leaving to build frameworks like Aurelia because of divergent opinions about the roadmap ahead, Angular is always struggling to rethink and re-architecture itself. The recent changes and shift towards simplicity might be a step into the right direction, but I fear it might be too little too late. If you've made it this far and you are an Angular fan, please share your hate in the comments, and until next time, thank you for watching.